Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On November 5th, a Wednesday. Welcome to the program, friends. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Aaron. Cherry, let's start the show with a number.
All right.
Okay? The number is 928. What do you think I'm referring to? This has to do with last night. Want to take a guess?
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
9:28 p.m.
Okay. That's the time. Okay.
was the time I got the push notification that Democrat Mikie Sherril had defeated Republican Jack Ciattarelli in the New Jersey governor's race. Exactly. So early. We've done enough of these now. These races, we've covered this stuff long enough to know if it's a competitive race, polls are going to be closed at least a few hours before you get declarations.
You just wait till the morning to find out.
Sometimes you wait till the morning. This one was over early, and that's because Sherril crushed Ciattarelli. We're going to talk about it today on the show. We're going to talk about all the results. Another little tidbit I'll pass along from last night. Every single county in New Jersey voted bluer last night than 2024.
Wow.
Every single one.
A big swing.
And New Jersey's not alone here. Virginia, blue. Yeah. Big blue wave in Pennsylvania. California, even Georgia. Did you know there was an election in Georgia? Well, it went bluer than expected. We're going to talk about why that happened, and we want to hear from you. How do you explain last night's blue wave? Do you think the momentum will hold for the 2026 midterms? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2 at whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat. Didn't even want to guess the number.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a tough one.
928, I was thinking, that can't be percentage points. And but 928, you're right. It was before 930. I do remember that, and I was really shocked. But I know folks probably were looking at these results. They probably have thoughts. So definitely call us, 888-477-9499. Email studio2 at whyy.org. I know you have some thoughts about this blue wave. We're going to jump into our trio of news stories.
Start us off.
Philadelphia International Airport. They are shutting down 2 TSA security checkpoints due to staffing shortages caused by the federal shutdown, which is now the longest shutdown in American history. Philadelphia Airport made that decision this week to temporarily shut down Terminal A West and F. All other checkpoints remain open. The big problem here is that air traffic controllers and airport security screeners have not been paid for more than 30 days. And while many continue to work with no pay, some have opted to call out to try to find other ways to make ends meet. Mortgage payments were due, child care payments, right? Tuition payments. So they have to do what they have to do. So that means fewer security checkpoints will mean longer lines. I heard that people were waiting up to 3 hours to get through security yesterday, to go through TSA. And the shutdown has cost the travel industry around $4 billion, and the losses continue to tick up. Transportation Department Secretary Sean Duffy has repeatedly suggested that the national airspace is less safe, as many of these employees are forced to work these side jobs, and they're also distracted when they're in the office.
They say in politics sometimes you need pain to make progress. We're starting to feel the pain on the ground with things like this. In the political world, I think the GOP is pretty shook up about how the shutdown might have affected the vote last night. And the pain's only going to intensify, I think, in both arenas. Yeah. And so perhaps that leads to some change, some breakthrough in the stalemate. We'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
Story number 2, and this news broke yesterday just as we were getting off the air, maybe while we were on the air. The CEO of the newly rebranded Philadelphia Art Museum was fired for cause yesterday. Sasha Suda had only been at the museum since 2022. This firing comes shortly after the museum, as you might know, changed its name and its logo. It's now the Philadelphia Art Museum instead of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is a pretty stunning change in leadership so quickly after letting this CEO totally rebrand the institution. Why was Suda fired? A little murky right now.
Yeah.
A little murky.
Unclear.
Maybe because of the rebrand. A trustee did tell the Inquirer recently that the board was not fully in the loop on the rollout of the rebrand. Although there's a little bit of me that thinks maybe the backlash to the rebrand Is the cover needed to get
Mm-hmm.
rid of a CEO that was clashing with the board? I don't know. I don't have inside information, but reading between the lines of some prior reporting by the Philadelphia Citizen and the Inquirer. So, look, turbulent times at a major Philadelphia institution.
Yeah, by the way, according to Philadelphia Magazine, Suda was terminated by the board via email for cause on Tuesday at 9:03.
That's cold, by the way.
And the board met at 10:30 to figure out what that cause was. So that's according to Philadelphia
That's not the order
Magazine.
it's supposed to go in, folks.
And like you said, that is cold. And I had the opportunity to work with Sasha Suda. I hosted an event at the museum last year, and she was great to work with. And I got to say, she came in at a very tumultuous time, right? 2022. During the COVID, lull, when a lot of arts organizations were struggling, post George Floyd, when, inclusion was a big topic, and, she brought some great exhibitions. But now it was time to pivot. And so it was a hard time for her to be. There were labor disputes when she came in.
Yeah, just as she started, the workers went on strike. She sort of inherited a strike, and it lasted for several weeks.
Yeah, so she had a hard 3 years, and, trying to recover at the art museum during such a tumultuous time, and then to be fired by email.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, the scuttlebutt reported in the Philadelphia Citizen is that some on the board felt she was too focused on inclusion, whatever that means. And they felt she was maybe a lackluster fundraiser at a time when the museum
needed money,
it needs money, is losing money. So maybe that's
and then the name change, the brand change.
But overall, the impression is of tumult. And this is an institution that's been around for a long time. It's a rock in the community. So, folks, we want to see it be a rock.
Yeah.
Again,
they got to deal with this.
Whoever's at the helm. Story number 3, Cherry. Go ahead.
Yeah, a Texas-based sushi restaurant is coming to Philadelphia.
Texas-based?
Yeah.
Sushi?
Lone Star State.
Lone Star Sushi?
The place is called Uchi, which means house in Japanese. It'll be located at the space at 1620 Sansom Street. It's owned and run by Austin-based and James Beard award-winning chef Tyson Cole, who has been working in the restaurant, the Japanese restaurant space for decades at this point. And the menu, I went to the website. The menu hasn't yet been posted, but there's some really cool photos, by the way.
Okay. Nice.
They have some salmon, coconut, lime leaf, and dill. It looks really cool. And according to the Inquirer, the a la carte menu will include a 10-course meal that would range from $350 to $425.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cheap.
Or a 10-course vegetarian tasting menu ranging from $125 to $150. And
what's a vegetarian eating at a sushi restaurant?
I don't know, but I want the meat. I want the seafood if I'm paying in the hundreds. You know what I mean? I don't just want some cucumbers. You know what I mean? Like, I want some real for that. But it looks beautiful.
Why you gotta put down cucumbers?
I'm
perfectly good vegetable.
I'm just saying, for $125, I need more than
cucumbers. You're on notice. Cucumbers. You know what you did.
And so the Uchi opens November 17th. I went to Open Table, and there are some reservations now. You're welcome.
But by the way, we should say, like, one of the reasons this is a big deal is because this guy has restaurants.
Oh yeah, all over
the country. Austin, Denver, Miami, Hollywood, and they're like huge hits everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's not like a chain in the McDonald's sense, but this guy is like, he's
blowing up.
He's exporting his version of sushi from Texas all over the country. And honestly, just the idea of there being like a Texas-based sushi kingpin is...
Kingpin? He gets the kingpin label.
I'm giving him a kingpin label.
Put a king hat on.
Magnate. That in and of itself is just proof of just how widespread sushi has become in this country.
And he's been trained all over the world. So he does have the credentials.
We're not trying to bag on him for being a Texas guy or anything like that, but obviously Cowboys suck. But the point I'm trying to make is that like the sushi revolution, it's been happening for like 40 years or so. But every once in a while you just step back and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like there was a great story, I think it was last month in the New York Times. Like we're talking about high-end sushi now, but supermarket sushi.
Oh yeah, it's pretty good.
It's one of the fastest growing categories of food in the country. According to Kroger, they sell 1 million rolls per day at Kroger's.
Wow.
And sales have jumped 50% since the pandemic.
Yeah.
At Kroger for sushi.
I was eyeballing some sushi at the grocery store yesterday.
It's a great convenient meal.
It is delicious.
I think I'm sure there's been books written, but I feel like you could write several books about it's one of the great food stories I think in modern American history, like the conquest of sushi here in this country.
Yeah.
No one would have predicted that 50 years ago.
No one. And the thing is, like, it's normal now. Before, people didn't know what sushi was. They didn't know what to order, but we've all been indoctrinated into the world of sushi now.
Well, Republicans are feeling a little raw after yesterday's election
Good
results.
transition, Wolfman Aaron.
Really bad night for the GOP all over the country, including here in New Jersey. We're going to talk about it. We want to hear from you. How do you explain last night's blue wave? And do you think that momentum will carry into the midterms 2026? Give us a call, 888-477-9499.
And welcome back to Studio 2 here at WHYY. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Arendt. So, Jack Ciattarelli did pretty well last night. And I did not misspeak. Jack Ciattarelli did pretty well last night. The Republican nominee for governor of New Jersey got more votes than he got 4 years ago. In fact, he got more votes than any Republican candidate for governor in New Jersey since the 1960s, according to Semaphore.
The problem for Ciattarelli, his opponent did even better, and I'm talking about way, way better. Democrat Mikie Sherril got more votes for governor than anyone in New Jersey history, and that was the story all over the country. Republicans turned out, but Democrats blew expectations out of the water.
Speaking of blue, the blue wave was not just limited to these big races in New Jersey or Virginia. It swept through Pennsylvania, California, Georgia. Dems even broke a GOP supermajority in deep red Mississippi. So the big questions now are why, and will this trend hold for 2026? And that's exactly what we want to hear from you today. Our questions of the day are, how do you explain last night's blue wave? And do you think the momentum will hold for the 2026 midterms? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat.
And while we wait for you all to call and to send in those comments, I want to introduce our guest. We have Kelly Dittmar, a professor of political science at Rutgers University, Camden. Kelly, so great to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Dan Hopkins, a professor of political science at Penn. Dan, welcome to Studio 2.
Good to be with you.
All right. I'm going to ask you guys the questions that we're asking our listeners. Like, how do you explain what happened last night all over the country? And Kelly, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I was thinking about this and I was just teaching before this and saying to students, part of it is when people are frustrated, when they are, concerned or angry or upset about what's going on, particularly in government, right? They try to find a place to make their voice heard. We saw it in No Kings rallies, but this election provided a space where formally they could kind of register their grievance, right? And they could say, we're putting this line in the sand. This is our thoughts about what's going on right now. So I think you saw that at least in these states and in these settings, you had voters, particularly who were leaning against the current administration, against the Republican Party, who wanted to make it known that we're here and we don't agree with the direction of how things are going. That doesn't mean that other folks who maybe are not as angry, just didn't turn out, right? Like, and that's a question for 26, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But I think this motivation of kind of, being upset or being frustrated was part of the story.
Yeah. So Kelly, I think, is saying that the big story here is backlash against the administration in Washington. Like, that might be a common thread running through all these elections. Dan, do you agree? Do you see it more as backlash as opposed to like, yay, we like the Democrats' messaging on, say, affordability?
That's a great question. And I definitely think that there is an element of backlash here, just as there's been in these off-cycle elections dating back years, right?
Yep.
If you think back, at least the last 30 years, I could identify one case where the Virginia governor's race returned somebody from the same party as the president.
Yeah.
Right. And so 2008, Barack Obama wins the presidency, wins Virginia very, very strongly. And then in 2009, Republican Bob McDonnell wins Virginia 58-41 or so.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think part of this is the expected backlash, exactly as Kelly said, the expected kind of course correction that we see against a presidential administration. These were, of course, the most high profile and high turnout races were in New Jersey and Virginia, both of which are blue states traditionally. But I think the magnitude of the Democrats' victories in those two states, as well as the unexpected victories. So, Avi, you mentioned some of the victories in unexpected places like, Register of Deeds candidates here in in smaller counties in Pennsylvania. And so this does seem both to be the expected backlash, but also I would point out that we have, in the history of polling, as best I can tell, rarely been at a place where the incumbent president has strong disapproval ratings as high as the current President Trump's. And I think part of that, then, exactly as Kelly said, is that Democrats are energized, sometimes angry, and Republicans more content, and so potentially less motivated to go to the polls.
Yeah. I want to bring in a caller. We have Colin from Newcastle, Delaware on the line. Colin, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Well, I would just like to say that I feel like a lot of people, especially from last night, that everyone was really pissed off at what has been going on in the government and what has been really transpiring this last couple of days with the shutdown. Mm-hmm. And my biggest thing is that, well, I came from Texas before I moved to Delaware, and everyone has that kind of, just big personality, and I feel like that personality has now gone sour, and people are turning towards the Democrats to really fill in that gap of hope that has been lost in this country.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's Colin from Newcastle, Delaware. By the way, if you want to give your take on, the last night's blue wave, if you want to talk about whether or not you think the momentum will hold for the 2026 midterms, give us a call. The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, keep those comments coming in the chat. And so I wanted to talk about, New Jersey, zoom in a little bit, because we set this conversation up by talking about this. I mean, they had more than 3 million people vote. Yeah. This was huge, the most ever in a gubernatorial race in the state. This is the first time in 60 years that that one party has held that seat for a third term. And just sort of, I looked at Mikie Sherril did great among Democrats in places where Trump had won. Yeah. Just sort of talk about the factors, because people have been really concerned about her messaging. There have been so many attacks. It had gotten really nasty. Trump and Republicans really thought Ciattarelli had a shot. Yeah. Sort of like, how did the pollsters get it wrong? They had it so close, Kelly.
Yeah. Look, I don't envy the pollsters today because they're going to get lots of questions. So I don't have the answer to why they got it wrong, though I would say they are struggling in an environment on how to poll accurately, as we've heard in the last couple of elections. But I do think this point about the margin of her victory, as you all have been emphasizing, is really important. First of all, the margin is very close to the margin in Virginia. So this idea that Spanberger did so much better or all this, like they actually did
that really stood out to me.
Very similarly.
Yep.
And I think actually to the caller's comment about people are just looking for competency sometimes and less chaos. And so, it may not be that Mikie Sherril is the most engaging speaker. I think that was some of the rub on her throughout the campaign. You know, it's not exciting enough. She's not flashy enough. But in this moment, maybe voters are just looking for somebody who's going to do the job, who's going to open the government. And I think you saw that in the talking points, both from Abigail Spanberger in New Jersey and from Mikie Sherril. So there's a little bit of, we're mobilized, not just because we're mobilized by this candidate, but we're mobilized by the thought that this person will actually get the work done instead of engaging in the partisan politics that they don't like right now.
And Dan, what are your thoughts? Because, you know, Trump tweeted that, you know, he wasn't on the ballot and people were pissed about the shutdown as the reasons why, you know, the Dems won so big. Your thoughts, and did the messaging like that they had have anything to do with this?
These are great questions. And I think back to Colin's question, which asks, how permanent is this? Is this a response to what's going on right now with the government shutdown or tearing down part of the White House? Is this something that's more structural? One thing I think that suggests it's a little bit more structural is just the fact, you know, exactly as Kelly had said, that we see two states that, you know, a year ago were about, you know, the Kamala Harris won by about 6 percentage points, and now the Democrats are winning by double digits, right? And by roughly similar margins. I think that would point to me to the fact that this is structural, right? One of the challenges is that one of the challenges for the Republican Party is that Donald Trump has very effectively changed the base of the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party in presidential elections is now more dependent on less engaged, lower information voters, people who are not paying attention to politics, and maybe they're not listening to us right now. But and that brings both promise for the Republicans, because there's a surge of voters who in presidential years are going to enter the electorate and help Trump, say, win Pennsylvania. But it also brings peril, because as the high engagement voters have shifted just a little bit towards the Democrats are increasingly doing well in special elections. And so I think one of the questions as we look to 2026 is just how much of a kind of engagement gap there's going to be. And I think this is, you know, these results are pretty consistent with the idea that Donald Trump mobilizes low information voters when he's on the ballot, but when he's not on the ballot and other down ballot Republicans are left to fend for themselves, they have a harder time.
And that creates a huge conundrum for every single Republican running in 2026 when Donald Trump will not be on the ballot.
Right.
It is very hard, it seems, to win a primary without hugging Trump right now as a Republican. Jack Ciattarelli definitely hugged Trump a little closer this time than he did 4 years ago, and definitely more than he did 8 years ago when he was sort of an anti-Trumper. But then you get to Election Day, and there's, I think, a real live question of can you embrace Trump in a primary as a Republican and then win in a midterm year? How do you think Republicans are analyzing that today, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I think an added question, how involved does Trump need to be in your campaign? So let's look at this year, right? So yes, he does a teletown hall for Ciattarelli. Yes, he didn't endorse Winsome Earl Sears in Virginia. And so that distance that Dan's talking about of like, he's not only not on the ballot, but he's also not highly influential in these particular contests. In 26, you could see races where he's there all the time. You know, he's much closer to the candidates, and that may engage the same type of voter who's just excited to go to the rally because it's Donald Trump, and okay, we'll vote for that guy that he's saying is good, or that woman that he's saying is good. And so I do think 26 in that way, for Republican candidates, especially in areas that are strongly red, they're going to look to have him there, right? They're going to look to have him in person.
But then if you're in a purple state like Pennsylvania, like if you're Stacey Garrity, who looks to be the front runner for the GOP nomination for governor in 2026, of course she's going to say she supports Donald Trump. That's beside the point. I think it's whether, does she campaign with him?
Right.
Does she court his enthusiastic support? If she's up against, say, Josh Shapiro as the Democratic nominee, who's broadly popular, viewed as a moderate. Like, Dan, if you're a Republican today, if you're advising Stacey Garrity, how are you trying to answer that question? I would be very nervous today if I were Stacey Garrity.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly the challenge that as Donald Trump has increasingly taken control of and come to be the dominant figure in American politics generally, and certainly within the Republican Party, the central question is how you navigate with respect to Donald Trump. And I think that that the Garrity campaign or, any statewide campaigns in Pennsylvania in 2026 are going to have to both try to harness the way in which he uniquely can engage the Republican base without turning off swing. That's the delicate balance.
Yeah.
And, some candidates have been able to walk the walk. Certainly Dave McCormick's campaign, but McCormick, of course, got to run for U.S. Senate
Trump year
alongside Donald Trump.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Mehmet Oz did not get that.
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
luxury.
That's right.
Yep.
I want to bring in another caller. We have Kathy from Voorhees on the line. Kathy, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Well, my comment is some of your guests have alluded to this, but I don't think in enough detail talking about low information voters and, who is paying attention during this cycle. And the Democratic voters and independent voters were high information voters. And what was on the ballot, Trump says it wasn't him. He wasn't on the ballot. But you know what was on the ballot? Trumpism was on the ballot. And everybody knew it. And the people who were voting, high number of independents in New Jersey, certainly Democrats overwhelm Republicans in numbers in New Jersey. But what we were voting on was Trumpism and everything that the administration is currently doing. You saw it in the turnout at the No Kings rallies. People are motivated by what they see happening.
Thank you so much. That's Kathy from Voorhees, New Jersey. And I want to kind of, because we're talking about New Jersey a bit, but I also want to talk about Pennsylvania when we talk about high information voters, because we had 3 Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices on the ballot. They got nearly 60% of the vote to be retained. Yes. And the thing is, you go to the polls. That is a hard ballot to look at. You don't know what is going on that ballot. You got to kind of know what you're looking for. And so, Dan, I mean, this was a situation where the voters had to be informed. They had to know what they were looking for. And people were motivated, and they showed up to the polls in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things voting in those Supreme Court retention elections turnout was about 50% of what it was in the presidential election last year here across the Commonwealth. And so that suggests some level of engagement and interest, given that, Supreme Court retention elections are not necessarily
boring.
what gets one up. Now, I will say that through the history of these elections, I think 2005 was the last time that Pennsylvania voters voted not to retain a Supreme Court justice. That said, there was clearly a fair amount of money spent, more money on the Democratic side than on the Republican side. But there were certainly statewide and national Republicans who had hoped that no votes in this retention election would set them up to, in 2026, potentially win back these 3 state Supreme Court seats.
And Kelly, I think about it because Avi and I, we were looking at the numbers, and the rest of the judges who were up for retention got like 85% of the vote, right? So it looks like some of the Republican money spent did have some inroads, but not enough to really make a dent.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think it kind of keeps going back to this, like, people were looking for some place to make their opinion known. I had a colleague say to me, a friend of mine works at a community center in Illinois, and somebody was coming in asking, do we have a vote today? Because I want to make my opinion known, right? There were no elections there, but it's just, I wanted a place. And so even if normally I don't pay much attention to Supreme Court or retention elections in Pennsylvania, I may have paid a little more attention. And I'd add that the money spent also means as soon as the Republicans start spending more money, right, then you hear about it. You all are doing a good job reporting on it. And then folks on the Democratic side are saying, oh, okay, we got to pay more attention and we got to activate and we got to mobilize around this. So there's a little bit of like a back and forth on this, which I will say also goes to 26. So if you're a Democrat, a little bit of the downside to yesterday is you've now played some cards. And so if I'm the Republican Party, I'm going, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Even though New Jersey and Virginia aren't every other state, it shows that there's energy that the Republicans have to respond to going into 26.
They know they got a problem to work on here.
Yeah.
We're just talking about Pennsylvania. I wanted to zoom in a bit on Philadelphia. And this was a race that, for DA, Larry Krasner beat Patrick Dugan Everyone expected that. But what caught my eye was that 340,000 people voted in that election. The last time Krasner was on the ballot 4 years ago, another off-year election, right? 215,000 people voted. So 215,000 to 340,000. And that's what we saw all over the country. It wasn't just margin. It was turnout. If I'm a GOP operative, that's what would concern me, Kelly, because we've been hearing, Democrats in the Trump era, they dominate these low turnout elections. And yes, this is a lower turnout election, but not as low as these elections tend to be in odd years. And that's the thing that would keep me up at night as a Republican. I'm curious for your thoughts, Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I also think, and it's not 24 hours yet. I would like to see more and kind of understand more where we saw the jump in that turnout. So like in New Jersey, right, we talked a lot about like Passaic County and the Latino vote in New Jersey. So yes, in the exit poll, we see that there was a huge shift back to the Democrats among that population. What we don't know is like which of those populations increased their turnout, and then how important, to your point, Avi, was that to the shifts. So my students were asking this morning, well, how did young voters do? Well, we don't quite know yet, right? We don't have enough of information. But if young voters turned out at higher rates, if voters of color turned out at higher rates, that gives us a little more understanding to go into 26 with which are the populations we need to mobilize, which are the populations we need to keep engaged going into that cycle.
Yeah. By the way, I want to read a couple comments. We have Yarnell from Brooklyn, New York, who says the whole second term.
What up, Brooklyn?
What up, Brooklyn? Yarnell says the whole second term Trump disaster probably needed to happen for a lot of people to see how important voting matters, local all the way to federal government elections. Ryan from Philadelphia says, while Trump was certainly the biggest factor, I would say this was slightly more targeted. Voters know who his collaborators are nationally and locally, and they voted them out. They're rejecting fascism and fighting to stop the racist classist takeover it is bringing. And so in honor of Yarnell from Brooklyn, New York, I want to kind of talk about the Zohran Mamdani, race. Also New York. He's now New York mayor-elect. They had huge turnout, a lot of young voters, but he's such a different candidate than candidates that you saw in New Jersey, that you saw in Virginia. And I wanted to read this quote because DNC chair Ken Martin said today on CNN that there's no one way to be a Democrat. He said, but the through line is kitchen table issues win. Do you agree with him? Was that the through line? Because you have super, Democratic socialists on one side, you have moderates on the other side. Was in your mind, do you agree with Ken Martin? And Dan, go right ahead.
And I'm glad you brought up the Mamdani race in New York City, just because it was a really interesting race. And it's interesting that somebody from Brooklyn is calling us here in Philly. But anyway,
thanks, Brooklyn.
The Mamdani Cuomo race had turnout that was about twice what the turnout was 4 years ago when Eric Adams was running.
Crazy. Twice. That just in politics, that's just not a number we see very often when it comes to turnout. Double.
Yep.
That's crazy. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in an age when people are so laser focused on what's happening in national politics, to focus on local politics and to get that engaged. Yeah, absolutely. One of the through lines is that, politicians, they read polls, they do focus groups, they talk to voters, and affordability is a clear through line, right? And I think one advantage that the Democrats have now, and this gets back to some of Kelly's comments earlier, is the fact that the Democrats are not in office, right? The Democrats are not responsible.
Inflation ain't their problem anymore.
This is not their fault. Yeah.
Yes. So, a year ago when I was lucky to be chatting about the 2024 election with you guys, at the time, something like 68% of Americans said that the economy was not in good shape, and they broke decisively for Donald Trump, right? And now the Trump administration and the Republican Party from D.C. all the way on down, including in local races, has to contend with the fact that they own the economy. Now, what's interesting is that this economy, in some ways, the stock market is doing very well. Unemployment is relatively low, and I think as we look to 2026, one of the things we don't know is what's the state of the economy going to be then? What are the big issues that we're going to be talking about?
But let me just jump in. A lot of people also pointed out in 2024 that the American economy had recovered better than other post-COVID economies all over the world, and yet people were not feeling it. And I think there's a live question, Kelly, about what does the American voter think is a good economy? Because right now it seems like
Yeah.
whoever is in office,
Yeah.
they blame that person for the economy and they say the economy is bad, somewhat untethered to the standard measures of how good the economy is. Your thoughts on that, Kelly?
Sure. I mean, it goes to, do they feel like
Yep.
when they go to the grocery store, when they get takeout, when they're, kind of going and getting new clothes or something like that, do they think the cost is too high?
Yep.
Most people are generally going to say yes, and those prices have increased. And they're going to blame the folks who are in office for that, no matter if there's a lag economically and all of this reason.
Yep.
So it is kind of that very basic, how do I feel? What does my bank account look like? And what do my bills
I
look
feel like
like?
neither party's really been able to get their arms around that and convince people that maybe the economy is better than they feel it is.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. People don't like you to give them the stats and figures and
Yep.
tell them they're wrong.
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, they react the opposite to that. There's great research on that. Like, don't put the numbers on the economy in front of somebody and say, you just don't understand.
Yep.
Because then you're an elitist politician who doesn't understand the day-to-day
Look,
experience.
they know
of
what
the
their
voters.
grocery bills are.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, we got a lot more to talk about. One thing I want to get on the other side of this break is how this might affect the redistricting efforts, because
Yes.
Republicans have made big
Prop
bets
50.
that in a lot of cases that they will retain some of their gains with Hispanic voters in Texas, for instance. Now do they look at New Jersey last night and say, oh, I don't know about that bet anymore? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about California on the other side of this break, talking with Kelly Dittmar, Dan Hopkins, and you on Studio 2. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I'm Deborah Becker. We'll wrap up reaction and results from the elections around the
And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arndt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Welcome back to our post-election day coverage. And we've been talking about last night's blue wave and what it means for the 2026 midterms and beyond. Our guests are Kelly Dittmar, professor of political science at Rutgers University Camden, and Dan Hopkins, professor of political science at Penn. They've been helping us unpack these results.
As have you, our listeners. We want to hear from you. How do you explain last night's blue wave? Do you think the momentum will hold for those 2026 midterms? Our number is 888-477-9499. Our email, studio2@whyy.org. You can also drop a comment on the YouTube and Facebook live streams. Let me read in a couple comments here. Edie says, I hope we can maintain the momentum. Here in Bucks County, we experienced the resounding defeat of Sheriff Fred Herron, who has been cozying up with ICE. Danny Seisler is our newly elected sheriff. I am over the moon thrilled about that. I'll also add that a Democrat unseated a Republican incumbent in the DA's race in Bucks County as well. Kate from New Jersey says she's happy about last night's results. She says, let Mamdani's victory be a lesson for Democrats. He ran on 3 simple promises: free childcare, free buses, rent control. Also, in his acceptance speech, he spoke as we instead of I. We will stand against Donald Trump. Rhetoric, rhetoric, rhetoric. Let's bring in now a caller. This is Jamie from Bala Cynwyd on the line. Hey, Jamie, you're on Studio 2. What is your question or comment?
Well, I'm celebrating last night like everybody is, but my concern has been growing and now is continuing to grow that there won't be a midterm election in 2026.
Okay, we just lost Jamie.
Manufactured that the fascistic movements that have been trending will continue, and they will manufacture a reason not to have the election, especially because of the results last night.
Well, I think Jamie cut out a little bit there, but thank you for the call, Jamie. I think what Jamie was talking about is fears that there will be, a thumb on the scale in 2026. And frankly, in some ways there already is, because there's redistricting efforts happening all over the country to squeeze more Democrat or Republican votes out of certain states. And we teased this before the break, Dan. I want to get your thoughts. A lot of the Republican strategy around redistricting, let's say in Texas, is premised on the notion that the Republicans can maintain some gains they made with certain voter groups, especially Hispanic voters. Well, last night in New Jersey, from the early indications that we got in heavily Hispanic cities in New Jersey, there was a hard swing back left. I'm curious now how all of this might affect redistricting strategy for both parties moving forward.
It's a great question. And we traditionally, as I'm sure you know, Avi, but some listeners may not, we traditionally only redistrict once every decade.
Yep.
And Donald Trump put pressure on initially the Texas Republicans to redistrict, and they drew a map that seemed very likely to return in 2026 at least 3 new Republicans, and 2 more seats were contingent, exactly as you said, on continued Republican growth with Latino voters. What we saw last night, though, was that Latino voters were voting not like it was 2016 when they were overwhelmingly Democratic, but still like, say, 2020 when they were a solidly Democratic constituency. And so I do think that Republicans just yesterday in Kansas had announced that they don't have the votes to proceed with their own redistricting efforts. There's talk that Indiana may meet this week to talk about redistricting. And I think from a purely pragmatic point of view, if you're a Republican strategist, you look at the results last night and you think, hey, I've got to get ready for what could be a Democrat plus 8 plus 9 kind of election in just a year's time. I don't want to spread my voters too thin.
Yeah, because then you open up vulnerabilities elsewhere by trying to pick off some seats, right?
Yeah, no. Eventually, I mean, you can only build the breakwater so high, right? And so, if you remember, Indiana, which is a state now considering redistricting, went for Obama in 2008, and so I do think that some legislators may be getting cold feet. Yeah. That said, the pressure that Donald Trump is able to apply in the Republican Party is certainly powerful, as we have seen in states like Missouri, of course, Texas. And the Democrats did answer last night by passing, by a surprisingly large margin, a measure in Proposition 50 in California.
And I want to talk about that because E. Mitchell Swan on YouTube says, I think you need to look at the Cali vote, a large turnout on a concept, not a person. Voters are smarter than you typically portray. To maintain momentum, the winners must emphasize the mission is not yet complete. Can we talk, Kelly, about Prop 50? I mean, overwhelmingly supported by California voters. And that measure would sort of offset the gains that Texas would likely get in the House. Can you talk about that? And then I want you to add on top of that what it does for Gavin Newsom as a potential prospect for 2028.
I'm sure he's thinking about it.
Sure. Yeah, I think he's thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, I think on the first part in California, 2 things. One is this is a direct democracy example, right?
Yep.
So we know when things are on the ballot and people care about them, it actually can mobilize them to vote, even though it may seem obscure. In this case, I think it goes back to your caller, right? Who's saying like, I'm concerned about just kind of elections running fairly. And so in some people's perspective, though this is very debated right now, it's California is making it more fair by arguably making it less fair, right? By saying if Texas is going to do this unfairly, set up these districts in a way that gives a Republican advantage, then blue states have to do it to restore us back to the middle, right? Back to where we were, back to the balance of power as it was. So I think for some people that motivation to come out and vote in that election and vote at high rates, again, is partly due to the fear of they, meaning the Republicans, are trying to rig the system against us, right?
Yeah.
So Newsom, I think surely he uses this as a way to say, I'm going to fight Donald Trump. Yep. And so one of what he's trying to position himself very clearly and has been doing for some time is, I'm the opposition. I'm the Democrat who's going to lead the charge against this guy that you all don't like. Mm-hmm. And one way he was able to do that with the powers that exist in the state of California is to push for this ballot initiative.
Do you think other governors in blue states like Maryland, like Illinois will take heed and say, you know what? Gavin Newsom looks like, a hero here for a lot of Democrats. A lot of people agreed with him stepping forward this way. Dan, do you think that other Democratic governors will become bolder because Gavin Newsom successfully brought this to the finish line?
That's a good question. And I think both. So one part of the question is, will we see other Democratic states trying to redistrict in reaction to what's happening in places like Texas and now California? But there, it doesn't just depend on Wes Moore, governor of Maryland. It also depends on the Maryland legislature, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that those Democrats who have aspirations to build a national brand or to run in 2028, they are certainly looking at the results of yesterday's elections, going to be lining themselves up in the anti-Trump vein, right? You're unlikely to see the Democratic presidential nominee in 2028 saying, well, we want to keep a lot of what Trump has accomplished, right? Mm-hmm. That is not the lane that is going to be successful in this contemporary Democratic Party.
Can I add one quick thing? So just to this point of California as well is very unique in how they were able to do this, right? So because it was through a direct democracy initiative, you saw the talking points from Newsom and many folks in the state saying, look, we're letting the people decide, right? Versus feeling like the Democratic-controlled legislature made this choice in a very
which is what happened
way.
In Texas.
Correct. So I think that it doesn't play as well in terms of those who are critiquing
in states
it
where
as
that's not the
anti-democratic.
method. That makes sense. Don't Touch My Hair on YouTube says, I think the Dems shouldn't be too confident. The Dems need to continue to reach out to voters who are not so tied to Trump or hardcore MAGA, continue to campaign on affordability issues. Julie from Philly says, my comment about the Democratic Party continuing to win elections is the fact that it is not through politicians alone we can create change. What worked was Zohran Mamdani's campaign was the fact that people were hungry to address economic inequality and the power of wealthy elites to shape government. Democrats will have to listen to what people really want and need in their lives. Keep those comments coming. Studio2 at WHYY.org, 888-477-9499. Of course, we're already looking forward to 2026. We've been talking about it and what this means for control of the House, control of the Senate. The last 3 times a single party swept New Jersey and Virginia governor's race, here's what happened in the following House midterms. This is from Jonathan Tamari of Bloomberg. 2006, Dems won both. They gained 30 seats the next year. 2013, Republicans did the same, gained 63 seats. And then 2018, after the 2017 sweep, New Jersey and Virginia Democrats gained 40 seats. It does seem to follow a pattern. Like if you lock down New Jersey and Virginia in that off year, in the midterm, your party tends to make gains in the House. I mean, should Democrats expect now, Dan, that is where this is heading in 2026?
Well, I think that 2026 is still a long way off, and there are a lot of events that could intervene. Right, we could be in a war in a year's time. We could have a pandemic. Right.
Yep.
That said, all of those are examples of nationalization, and I think like the subtext of this whole conversation is that our politics is nationalized now. Right, when people go,
we were going to have this conversation yesterday. We're like, well, we'll talk about how Sherril campaigned and Ciattarelli campaigned, and then we looked at the results in Virginia and everywhere else and said, well, the exact same thing happened everywhere. Right, so how can we really focus on the particulars of this campaign when, like you're saying, Dan, it just seems like the environment, the political environment, is the whole ball game now. Maybe it won't be in every election. It certainly feels that way today.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge for those of us who follow campaigns closely, because we like to think that last-minute speech or this ad that you cut that was so well done was the decisive answer. And then you look at an election like yesterday and you see something was happening in a very common way across the country. And part of that is a nationalized media market where, people are getting their news often from national sources, and they're responding primarily to what's happening in D.C.
Yep.
You know, it's a great example of that is like the electricity rates in New Jersey, right? So many people were like, this is going to be the issue, right? And this is going to be so unique to New Jersey. And I'm not saying it didn't matter. I'm sure it did, because it's part of the affordability conversation.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter differently than affordability in Virginia.
Or even the whole sort of, Sherril is going to run after Phil Murphy, who has been in power for 8 years. Murphy's very unpopular according to polls. This is a huge lead weight. It wasn't. It wasn't at all. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I want to read this comment from Ruth and get your thoughts. She says the blue wave was Democrats getting up and possibly realizing that they made a mistake last year and not voting. I think Trump and his friends are plotting revenge that may come before next year's elections. Those guys have little to do other than find ways to do harm to people they think are against them. And I want to talk about some of these lapsed Democrats, because that was, a big part of the boost in turnout that you saw in New York, you saw in New Jersey. And I wanted to just sort of imagine what the 2026 coalition for Democrats would look like, because, is it different from the Obama coalition? It seems like the Trump coalition, where they won last year, that included, black and some black and a lot of Latino voters, working class voters. Do you think there will be a shift back to blue? Like, if you were trying to envision what the coalition will look like for a landslide or another blue wave in 2026, what would that look like, Kelly and Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think this does go back to like a political principle that still holds true, which is the party in power, right, is going to be kind of to blame for the things that people don't like. And so what we saw Trump be able to do is say, the Democrats told you, black voters or Latino voters, they told you that they represented you, but how's the cost of eggs for you, right? Like, this is not working out well. It is harder to do that when you're the person who has the White House, who's in control in the majority in both chambers of Congress, and arguably as well in some of these states. And so going into that next cycle, I think it is easier for the Democrats to try to win back some of those voters who maybe are the more lax voters and who are more focused on like, how am I feeling at this moment? And what am I mad about this moment? And am I going to blame the current government? So some of those same messages that Trump used last time, the Democrats will use, as they did in these elections, to say it's the Republicans who shut down the government.
Yeah, so interesting. Any thoughts, Dan?
I would just add that if you're a Republican looking for signs of hope last night, there were legitimately not too many. One interesting fact, though, emerged in the New Jersey exit polls, which was that union voters voted identically to non-union voters. Right. And unions have traditionally been a source not just of voting strength for the Democratic Party, but also of organizational strength. And so I do think that we saw, even in a set of elections where Democrats did very well, the Democrats didn't quite reach their 2016 highs with Latinos, and they clearly are continuing to shed the kind of union support that, a generation ago, unions were the anchor kind of tenet of the Democratic Party, and that's no longer true. And so I think that the Democrats, as they think about waging the kind of campaign across a number of districts that 2016 will require.
And that speaks to a realignment that maybe could outlive Trump, because we talk about how powerful Trump's name is on a ballot. But if you're still seeing those trends of, say, like working class voters, union voters, still sort of tiptoeing toward the GOP, at least from where they were 10, 15 years ago, that suggests maybe a true realignment instead of just a Trump effect. Go ahead, Kelly, as we wrap up.
Can I just speak real quick? I think this also speaks to, I would be remiss not to talk about gender. The gender difference in these races versus 4 years ago. I mean, it is white male voters, even white college educated male voters have continually moved towards the right. And in this case, those were the only groups that Mikie Sherril didn't win. She won every other group by race and gender, right? And so seeing that, which may also overlap a little bit with that union stat, right? Yep. In thinking about what's going on with that group and then what does that mean for the coalition next time, I think that's worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. A lot to talk about, a lot to come. Always a great conversation with these two. That's Kelly Detmar, professor of political science at Rutgers University, Camden. Kelly, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
And Dan Hopkins, professor of political science at the University of Pennsylvania. Appreciate the time, Dan.
It's an honor.
And thank you to all our callers. Sorry we didn't get to you. Vince from Bensalem, please listen again and call again. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to our producers, Debbie Builder and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Tina Calicay engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory from Studio 2 here at WHYY. Post-Election Day, I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. We will talk to you tomorrow.
And tomorrow on Studio 2, we have a special episode on the shrinking options for local news and what's at stake for communities when local journalism disappears. We'll be live from 2 locations. I'll be here at WHYY.
Yes, you will. And I'm about to hop in the car because I'll be in State College at WPSU-FM, one of the latest news outlets facing the existential threat of closure. Join us for that conversation tomorrow. Coming up next on WHYY, as always, it's Here and Now.